All right, welcome back. You're watching Citizen Business Center, and we're now talking to Anzetse Were, development economist, who will be sharing with us more about the current state of Kenya's economy. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, the state of the economy with a cash crunch in focus has been central to discussions in recent weeks. The government has delayed to disperse money to counties, to Higher Education Loans Board, and several state corporations, as we have seen in the news. And the common consensus is that we did not really see this coming. Do you agree with that?
I think those who've been watching the economy saw this coming, particularly in light of the new constitution, where we have a much larger number of people in elected office. The wage bills and the recurrent expenditure bill has been quite hefty. If you look at our recurrent expenditure in 2013 to 14, it was 78% of our budget went to recurrent. Last year, it's going to be about 68%. Government is trying to get that down to about 60 to 50% this year. So the story has always been, since the new constitution came into play, that recurrent expenditure is a monster and we have to get it grappled and to deal with it. Part of the reason why recurrent is so high is because people in elected office in Kenya get paid substantially more than their peers around the world. If you look at how much MPs are paid in Kenya, if you look at their salaries compared to what the average Kenyan would earn, they get about 76 times the amount of money that the average Kenyan would earn. So the real problem that we're having is one of spending discipline, as well as a failure to get our wages, particularly of those in elected office, to a place where recurrent expenditure, allowances, trips, conferences, seminars, etc., need to be brought down substantially so that the money can then be channeled into development funding.
How about corruption? Do you see it playing a major role in, in how we got here? And of course, you've mentioned mismanagement of public funds in that case where, we take more than we should take, especially where government officials are concerned. Where does corruption fall?
I think corruption is really quite a big monster in this under the new constitution due to several reasons. First of all, this is the first administration implementing the new constitution, and to be fair to the situation, nobody knows what corruption really looks like, so the scale of corruption that's going on right now, because as you know, there are so many more fingers in the pot. We've got senators, MPs, governors, MCAs, So what I think needs to happen is for government to put very focused activity on figuring out where those corruption holes are and plugging them to the fullest extent possible. Otherwise, it's becoming a runaway monster. And really, we're creating a culture in Kenya, and this is really my concern, is that we need to start having conversations around austerity for government. Government spending must be cut. And one of the problems that we're having as a Kenyan people is that government in elected office has become a means to get rich quick. So as a result, we're creating a culture where the people who vie for office are not necessarily the people who want to build the nation and be servant leaders. Some of those guys, quite frankly, want to get rich, make their money, and then retire to a very comfortable place elsewhere. So I think as Kenyans, one of the things we need to do also is focus more on the economics of what's going on. Instead of listening to this politician told that politician that and then this politician no, let's look at what's going on with our economy. Why is our recurrent expenditure so high? What happened to the Eurobond? Why is government borrowing locally after we floated a bond last year, 2.2 billion? These are the questions that I think need to be answered.
You've talked about borrowing, and I'd like to raise that point. And I was reading today where economists are saying, excessive domestic borrowing will eventually, drive up the cost of borrowing for the private sector, and that includes, the regular Kenyan going to the bank for money. How do you see that playing out?
It's a nightmare. One of the reasons we as economists were, qualified happy when the Eurobond did so well when we floated it last year, is that because we knew domestic borrowing would remain in the hands of private sector. Now government is saying they want syndicated loans worth 78 billion in the domestic sector. Now what that happens is that it gives banks the knowledge and the know that they can raise interest rates because most of the borrowing will be going to government, and they don't need to look or hunt for people to get loans because they're giving a bunch of money to government. So as a result, what happens is that private sector is crowded out. The average person on their mortgage will probably get their interest rate hiked up, and the really important with interest rate is that it tends to inform the extent to which an economy will perform. Kenya, we're already underperforming in terms of our GDP growth. We were projecting GDP growth of about 6%. We've hit about 4.5, 4.9. We're probably not going to pass 5% this year. So when you now add the problem of higher interest rates on top of that, it will mute growth even further.
I want to get your position on, a point that was raised by the Standard newspaper this week, and they said, some quarters are saying that the cash crisis has been attributed by a decision by Kenyan authorities to implement tough conditions agreed on with the International Monetary Fund last month, that Kenya must pay its debt, sometimes even 30 days before the debt is actually due. Could that have played a role, do you think?
This is a broader problem that we're having because we're an import economy, right? Which means we have a large current account deficit. So when we get foreign denominated debt in euros or in dollars, we have to look for shillings, convert them into dollars, and then service the debt. So what's happening is that as the shilling has been depreciating and as the dollar has been strengthening, when we were getting, for example, our euro bond, Kenya, our shilling was at about 85. Now we're looking at 105. So as time is going on, it is becoming more and more expensive for us to service our debt. Now that is creating anxiety. And I think that is probably informing this sort of urgency by international agencies to get us, you need to pay, you need to pay, you need to pay. Because they know that if we get into the habit of slipping away or slipping back with our payments, given the fact that we're an import economy, that we have to sell shillings to buy dollars to service the loan, it will become a domino effect that will be, a bit of a nightmare to get back into control. So I do understand the pressure, and I do feel that it is important, crucially important, for us to get that foreign debt serviced, because if we don't, we're headed towards Argentina or Ghana, or where are we going?
And we don't want to go there.
Right.
So what is the way forward, do you think? There's all this things that are happening. The government has to borrow more now. The syndicated loan that you just talked about, 78 billion, perhaps some more borrowing expected in the next few months to cover that plug. What way out? What can the government do as
they have to get recurrent expenditure down, because we're borrowing for recurrent expenditure. It would be fine if we were borrowing for development financing. I don't think any of us would have our arms up in a hullabaloo about that. If we do not get recurrent down, I am telling you, we cannot afford to have proceeds from the Eurobond funding allowances and wages and trips. That is absolute lunacy, because we have to make money and pay it back with significant interest. So for me, the real story is government figure out where the corruption holes are, plug them. Can you put some money into this so that we can figure out where the holes are? And number two, we must get recurrent down.
All right. Anzetse Were, development economist, telling us more about the state of Kenya's economy in the backdrop of the cash crunch that we are currently experiencing. We're taking a short break. We'll be back with more right after this break, including Smart Farm, where we're featuring a bamboo farm. Don't go too far.